How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling. We're going to have Nick Bockwinkel on the show today, which I'm really looking forward to, despite what Bobby Heenan said yesterday. And, of course, we've got Brian Alvarez here for the next 2 hours. We're going to talk about the news, take your phone calls, and all that good stuff. Of course, tonight is SmackDown, so we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow on the show. Brian, you know, how much of a Mick Foley's book, because actually the last day or so, I've kind of been immersed in Mick Foley's book. How much of that book have you read so far? I think I'm up to about the third chapter right now, right after the I Quit match. Okay, I'm about 250 pages in. So I will probably talk more about it by the time I'm done, but I mean, I was pretty entertained reading it. It's a good read. He gets so many inside references in that kind of surprised me, because I'm thinking, like, you know, what percentage of people reading the book are going to know it? I think he relies a little bit too much on his one-liners as far as, you know, like knocking Al Snow in the Mean Street Posse. I mean, at the beginning, some of those knocks were hilarious, but he goes over and over on them. But I mean, overall, it's a good read. A lot of the stuff as far as his career and decisions that were made by Vince McMahon, such as, you know, his comeback and you know, these major events in wrestling history over the last, I mean, a couple of things stuck out at me. Number one was that, you know, this book pretty much picks up at the early part of 1999, I guess it is, or actually the last week of 98, when he first won the title. And I'm thinking, this is 2 years ago, and I'm reading this, and I'm feeling like, this is like it was 100 years ago. You know, Mick Foley. Remember Mick Foley and Rock in the I Quit match and Beyond the Mat? I mean, it's just like, that seems like, I mean, I remember it vividly, but it seems like it was forever ago. Mm-hmm. And then, like, right now he's talking about the build-up for his comeback. You know, because he was originally, as everyone knows, he was going to retire. And then he ended up main eventing those two pay-per-views against Triple H, those two phenomenal matches in the early part of 2000, and then retiring at the WrestleMania and all that. And I'm up to the point where, you know, it was interesting. The Big Show had just won the title, and Mick Foley came in with the idea to Vince McMahon that, you know, he had figured that it would be Triple H against The Rock in the main event at that WrestleMania, which, in fact, was the plan. And I don't know exactly, I haven't gotten to the point where the plan was changed, although I basically know, I mean, why it was changed. But, I mean, that was the plan. So his idea was he would go in there, and he basically felt that The Rock was ready, but Triple H wasn't ready. So his job would be his last act in wrestling would be to get Triple H ready by, you know, putting him over a million times, which, in fact, he did. And so he put that idea to Vince, and Vince said no. And then it basically, just for a number of reasons, and one is that Vince didn't think that he was in good enough condition, and just Vince said no. I mean, Vince's idea was the Big Show and Triple H. So then one day, and this is how simple it is, and how much this business changes based on, there was a match in Madison Square Garden, and the Big Show did not get a big enough pop, and Vince just goes, he's just not over enough, and then he went to Mick Foley and goes, you know, Big Show's not over enough, I'm going to do your idea. And you know, so instead of Triple H and the Big Show in those two matches, ended up being, which probably would never have gotten Triple H over, even though he would have won both of them. Or maybe he wouldn't have, because that was before they gave up on Big Show and you know, were beating him like a drum like they do now, which is also amazing. But you know, so those two matches, I mean, you know, if Big Show had gotten a slightly bigger pop in Madison Square Garden at some December 1999 house show or TV show, I don't even remember if it was TV or whatever it was, then those two matches with Triple H and Mick Foley never would have happened, and Mick Foley would have retired. And he would have retired as, you know, with all those terrible matches of his last year, which I mean, I've never seen a guy go in there and just say that, like, God, I was terrible, God, I was fat, God, I couldn't do anything. I mean, he made himself out to be far worse than he was at that time, which I give him credit for that. But anyway, a very interesting book. I would definitely recommend it. It's, I'm actually just starting the chapter on the drugs, which is the chapter that I had been pre-warned that I wouldn't like the most. And I haven't gotten far enough to not like it, to not like that chapter. The only chapter that I was kind of a little down on, I don't want to say down, I will say this, because I actually put the book down, which the first book, Have a Nice Day, I read it every moment I could till I finished it. This one, I was doing the same thing, just cruising along, enjoying it, you know, agreeing with probably 90% of what he said. Thought he was a little too defensive of wrestling on certain occasions. I mean, you know, like, was very defensive, as a lot of people are when it comes to wrestling, by knocking it. And what he did was, instead of defending wrestling, what he did was he said, well, there's fighting in hockey. Well, guys get hurt in football. And they all do. Guys get punched out in boxing, which God knows they do, which is not necessarily defensive of anything that anyone does in wrestling other than, and he did very clearly state that he thought chair shots to the head, were not a good idea. You should hit guys as hard as you can in the back, which is kind of ironic that, at this point in time he's coming to that conclusion since he took so many chair shots to the head. He had a lot of stuff as far as the legal system and journalism that I thought was pretty good, trying to make it like the legal system was more fake than wrestling, which actually I think it's equally as fake as wrestling, but more dangerous than wrestling, because wrestling's supposed to be fake, so it's okay, and the legal system's supposed to be real. As far as journalism, I don't think journalism is, in the wrong people's hands, it's as fake as wrestling. In the right people's hands, it is not. But there are instances, God knows, we've seen them where it's every bit as fake as wrestling, and again, probably more dangerous because, we know people take stuff seriously they read in the newspaper, when it could be, like we talk about when it was not just wrestling, on any story. It could be so far from the truth. Just any subject that, it always is scary, any subject, and it doesn't have to be wrestling, that like Brian, like say it was gymnastics or ultimate fighting or whatever, and you read a story in the paper, doesn't it just boggle your mind sometimes when you're just going like, this doesn't even give a clue as to the subject. Yeah.
And then I read that and I think, what about all these other articles that I'm reading them and I know nothing about them, and I'm reading this article to learn more about them?
Well, how about, what scared me is all the business analysis. I would say 95% of the business analysis before the season of the XFL, when I would read it, I would just go like, and it didn't matter if they agreed or disagreed with my preseason viewpoint on the XFL. I would just be reading this going like, these people just have no clue of sports business. Mm-hmm. It was like the whole thing, no matter which, what they thought it would be, there were people who thought it would be successful and people who thought it would be unsuccessful going in, but I'm reading it going like, you just don't have a clue about business. And even during the season, God knows there were enough of them. Even late in the season, when ratings were out and everything, there were people, still doing that. Well, this is why it failed because of the Saturday night thing. Actually, they were saying that last night again, as a matter of fact. I wonder why I brought that up.
Ironically.
Yes, we can talk a little bit about that. WWF House Show Sunday in Columbus, Ohio has been canceled. They made the announcement in the market on radio this morning. They're all the tickets, and they sold a lot of tickets for that event, so it was not canceled due to low ticket sales. All those tickets will be used or will be valid for September 24th for a Raw taping in the same building. It was canceled due to injuries to top stars, and I have not been able to get a...
Too bad for them, That's what happens when you don't elevate anybody. You have 3 or 4 top guys, they get hurt, and you're screwed.
I don't even know. Do you even know the injury situation? Obviously Undertaker.
The full list? No.
Okay. I just know Undertaker. I know Jericho's got a bad back, but I don't know if he's on the list as far as... Actually, Jericho's got a pretty bad back. Regal's hurt, but Regal's been working through it, so I don't know that he's on the list. So I don't know what I'm trying to find out more, and have not been able to as far as, how many people are hurt, as to necessitate the cancellation of a house show. That's pretty big deal. WWF had a big presentation at WWF New York last night. Let me get what's the name of that thing. They are starting a campaign, and it is called, what is it called? Think Again. And they released a survey that they commissioned themselves, which, believe me, they need to do this. It was to the ad community, and we've talked about this on every show about what the ad community thinks of pro wrestling right now. And they paid for a survey. And the survey that they paid for said that the WWF viewers are at above the national average or at the national average in several key demographic or behavioral indicators, including income, which actually directly contradicts the Gallup poll thing. And this is not
starting fights with dates. Oh, is that?
They didn't have that one. No, they didn't have that one. No, but they actually had commissioned this one long before those last two things came out. It's like it's a week later and you're going like, this is in retaliation, but they actually had commissioned this a long time ago because I remember being told about this one. Anyway, income, which contradicts the Gallup poll thing, employment status, education, which also contradicts the Gallup poll thing, asset ownership, God knows, actually I'm trying to find out more about it, and adoption of new communications media, which I have zero question that WWF viewers would be well ahead of the national average in that for just a lot of reasons.
Because they're so young.
Because they skew so young, exactly. So anyway, that's the main stuff, and we will probably have more on that later. Anyway, this is...
They had a big press release that came out today, too. I haven't even read the whole thing yet, but just about that whole deal.
Right. This is from Stu Snyder, who said, our research shows the World Wrestling Federation unquestionably delivers a vast multi-generational audience. That, you know what's so weird is that, I'm sure it exists, but, the drop-off in ratings is so strong after the age of about 30 that, you know what I mean? That sort of contradicts, I'm sure there are parents who are 40 that are watching it, but the ratings of people over 30 for WWF is not particularly good at all. Now, the ratings under 30 is excellent. But anyway, because essentially the country is watching together. Our fans are a broad section of America. They're doctors, lawyers, stockbrokers, paralegals, and construction workers who are highly committed to the brand, something we believe that the advertising community has not fully recognized. While we've consistently delivered the coveted 12 to 34 demographic to our advertisers, we believe that our research findings will motivate advertisers looking to reach a broad spectrum of demographics to think again about the WWF brand as an effective advertising and marketing tool for their products. The other thing that came out of this was a lot of XFL, and Vince McMahon said that he contacted WB about carrying the XFL, and a WB spokesman in very harsh terms said that the XFL will not be on WB. So basically, the future, and McMahon did say that without a network, which would be either WB or UPN, committing to it, that the league would fold. I mean, he did say that last night. So basically, the decision comes down to UPN in the next, sometime before the 17th, because the decision's being made this week. Well, the fall schedule is being released on the 17th, so they're going to make that decision in the next couple days, and we'll either have an XFL next year or we won't. And he blamed the NBC ratings, this is Vince, on the people who would watch the games were out partying, not sitting at home. He blamed the Sunday night ratings on brutal competition from other stations and said that Sunday afternoon is actually the best time for these games, which, of course, I'm not even saying anything.
Competition on Sunday night.
Well, 60 Minutes, which gets that
brutal.
Gets that coveted 55-plus demographic that they actually was their
was
their key demographic. Their biggest demographic on Saturday night was 50 to 54, so it actually is. Anyway, and Millionaire. Isn't Millionaire on Sundays a lot? I don't even know, because I'm usually writing about wrestling or watching wrestling on Sunday nights, one or the other. Let's see. Pride announced 2 matches for their pay-per-view. It will take place May 27th, pay-per-view in Japan. It will air in the United States on Saturday, June 16th. It's on DirecTV, the Dish Network, and Bellevue Cable are the only people who are carrying the Pride, and also Viewers' Choice Canada. But Viewers' Choice Canada, we don't have a date on it yet. But the 2 matches that were announced, in addition to the other matches, are Gilbert Ibel versus Igor Vovchanchin, which is one of those matches which on paper just looks like phenomenal. Like, oh my God. Unfortunately, when it comes to Pride, sometimes these matches look phenomenal. They could end in a minute. I mean, you never know. But, you've got probably the 2 best, I would say probably, you've got the 2 best heavyweight strikers in the mixed martial arts in those 2 guys. Maybe Pedro Hizo would be in that category as well. But Gilbert Ibel is the most exciting stand-up fighter. His big problem is that he cannot avoid a takedown, and once he's on his back, he often can't get up. He's awesome under rules that give you stand-ups, like if the action slows on the ground and they stand you up in 30 seconds. He's awesome because, given enough chance to get a stand-up, sooner or later he's going to hit the guy or knee the guy. But when you're on your back the whole time, it's pretty difficult to get that knockout knee blow or punch. But Igor likes to keep it standing, so it could be a great fight. Actually, if they stay standing, I think Gilbert Ibel will take Igor. Although Igor's a harder hitter, Gilbert is just quicker and more skilled. Gary Goodridge against Valentin Overeem, which is a good fight. Valentin Overeem's, one of the top guys from rings, so he made the big jump. I know UFC was interested in him. He's got a great look, great on the ground. He tapped out Randy Couture in 56 seconds, so that tells you about his ground. Great standing up, very exciting fighter. Gary Goodridge is one of those, tough, charismatic guy. And those were the 2 matches announced. I know, of course, they're going to have Yoshihiro Takayama against Kazuki Fujita in the main event, which is New Japan Pro Wrestling versus Pro Wrestling Noah. By the way, that will not be for the IWGP title, so that's kind of been settled. And Ryan Gracie against Kendo Kashin, which is like, I don't know. I mean, I shake my head about that.
It'll be a sad day for Kendo Kashin.
It's already been a sad day for him because they already did that match, and it was already a sad day. And they're going to announce, I think, 3 more matches in the next week. I know they're interested in Chuck Liddell against Guy Metzger, which is an interesting match. And Vitor Belfort possibly on the show, and Pele against Frank Trigg. So, I mean, the main event, Fujita and Takayama, I think, is just going to be a terrible fight. Just figuring how they match up. Fujita's going to take him down and probably submit him really quick. But, maybe they'll have a strong
But you never know.
No, that last UFC, I know people who know fighting that got all 6 matches wrong, so, that's what's going on. Any other big news before we start hitting the emails?
We can talk about Saturn.
Saturn got sent home. I don't have much in the way of details, but I know it happened. Did you hear any more about it other than, there was a story I heard.
I'm pretty sure it was a match with Mike Bell.
Okay. And what happened in that match? Because that's all I heard was very brutal. That the way I heard the story, okay, and I'm trying to get this confirmed, was that Mike Bell froze up, and Saturn just pounded him because the guy was frozen, I guess, and they thought that he pounded him a little bit too hard and sent him home. So that's how I heard the story.
It was something like, I think he froze, and I think it was also he might have hit Saturn with something really hard, and Saturn, in the old days, I shouldn't say all guys, but sometimes if you potatoed somebody, you could expect to get a real pounding in return, and I think it was something like that, and Saturn just pounded him, and that was that.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll hear more about that. I'm going to start with some emails, and email number 1 is from someone who didn't recognize me being facetious, because he says, how could you say that Chris Benoit only has good matches when he's carried? I said that because, that was being facetious, because that's what certain people that have kept Chris Benoit in the mid-card, or high mid-card, have, in fact, given as his drawback. His 2 drawbacks are is that he doesn't look and look for approval from the fans enough, that he's too busy, doing his match to make it look real.
Having a hell of a match.
Yeah. He doesn't. That's valid. And that he needs to be carried to have a good match, and that's totally invalid. So totally invalid. Anyway, it's from Alex, who goes, I was on a movie site today. I found some interesting stuff. The site gives info on films in production for Scorpion King. Vince McMahon is listed as a producer. Do you know if this is accurate? Everything. I think that he's got probably a credit in this one coming up. Anything, like every movie that Bill Goldberg did, or Sting did, or DDP did, there was always some line of credit for Eric Bischoff. That's just how, when you make a deal to get a guy, his promoter, or the guy who negotiates the deal, kind of gets himself into the credits. And that's, Vince, any movie that when Hogan used to be in WWF, Vince always had some credit, some credit line on every one of those movies. And so Vince will have.
I'm sure he regrets now.
On those movies, yes. On this movie, Scorpion King, if it does any kind of business like The Mummy, Vince is going to carry that one to his. What's funny is there was a movie that was being filmed here. It was on the life of Ann Calvello, who some of you may actually know who that is. She was a famous roller derby skater in the 60s actually. And I don't know if the movie ever came out. It was a documentary, and I was invited to the screening, which I didn't go to. And then later, they were trying to raise money, and what they do is, to raise money for these kind of movies, they sell credits. So, I could have been the, producer of the movie for, $10,000 or something.
Wow.
I could have been and it could have been, if the movie was really great.
Well, technically, you would have helped produce it by giving that $10,000.
Yeah, but you could buy any credit you want. Writer, you could buy anything. They had for sale.
Top billing?
I couldn't have been the star of the movie, no. But no. All of those other things, they were, I was going wow, so this is how Hollywood works. Which is also more fake than wrestling. We should do a story on. Actually, the more I think about it, the more I like that title. Let's see, of that book. Let's see, what else do we got here? Brian, asking you about Extreme Canadian Championship Wrestling. I know you don't work for them, so but they go, how do you view it, or what do you think of it, or do you
I've
know
never
about
even
it?
been to a show. Tim is kind of, I think Tim would physically kill me if I showed up at one of those events, even to watch. Okay. So I've avoided that.
This is from Jeff Nettleton, who goes on the show yesterday. When you come back from a commercial, you had the music, the Midnight Express, playing, and you mentioned Randy Savage in the old ICW. He goes, we used to get that show in Springfield, Illinois, and I remember the music being used as the theme for the TV show, which is right, it was. And Randy Savage came out also to Hot Stuff, which I don't remember, and Fame, which now that you bring that up, I remember Randy Savage to Fame. Oh, yeah, that was very early Randy Savage. And he goes, also, did Bobby Heenan have a brother or a cousin who wrestled in the WWA? I remember a guy who looked like him who wrestled under the name Jerry Valiant. There was a guy, the guy who wrestled as Jerry Valiant, his real name is Jerry Hill, and also Stomper Guy Mitchell, started his career, or early in his career, wrestling under the name Jerry Heenan, and a lot of people thought that they were related, but the Jerry Heenan was just a wrestling name, and they were not related. Let's see. Let's see. What do we got here? God. This is long stuff. Okay. When did wrestlers start using finishing moves? I don't know, the 1880s, I suppose.
The first match that had a finish?
Yeah, I would guess so. What year had the best wrestling pay-per-views? That's tough. Last year for WWF was pretty damn, 2000 was pretty darn great.
Yeah, it was an awesome year.
Yeah, I mean, 97 may have been good because WWF had some real good ones that year, and it had a few bad ones, but it had some real good ones, and WCW had a lot of real good ones too. So that might have been a good year as well. 'Cause by 98, WCW was really starting to stink on pay-per-view, even though WWF was coming up. So I would say for both companies, maybe 97, because 96 WWF was pretty weak.
Hey, out of curiosity, off the top of your head, what do you remember as being the best Raw the last good Raw show?
The day after WrestleMania wasn't too bad. I mean, the main event was, I think, as I remember, or maybe the week before. Well,
I was just thinking about this the other day. There's been a long time since I've seen a Raw show where I've went, that was a really good show. And I was thinking back that even when Nitro was really bad, every now and then they'd pull a real great one out of their ass, and I'd go, that was a good show. And then it would go on back downhill again.
Not that much, though. Not that much. I would be willing to bet that come the end of the year, when we add up how many good Raws there are this year, it'll be a hell of a lot more than the good Nitros from last year.
I sure hope so.
Oh, God, so do I.
I'm ready for a good show tonight, but the thought of no main events again is like, because it's like, just like this past Monday, the first hour I was actually pretty happy, and it really went all downhill from there. Same with that show that had like Regal and Benoit and Jericho and Angle, and it all went downhill from there. And when the show's over and there's like no main event or a bad main event, you're just left with that, and it's like, that show just wasn't very good.
I hope to God that the WWF is able to convince the advertising community that wrestling is at least in the same ballpark as the average people, because that is, the fact that it's that those surveys have come out that it isn't have probably been, are more damaging than the actual decline in ratings and things like that, because even with a decline in ratings, the ratings are still, more than competitive. I mean, they're great numbers on UPN, and they're unbelievably great numbers as far as cable. I mean, not compared to 6 months ago, but they're still great numbers. But what kills them is the fact that people go, well, yeah, those numbers are great, but it's all those poor, toothless wrestling people, and so why waste our money advertising on them? And that's the killer, and that's why USA Network is, not adding wrestling after, 15, 17 years, whatever it was, of, having highly rated wrestling products, and why TBS and TNT canceled even though those shows were still above the network average. I mean, that's the culprit. The culprit isn't the ratings. The culprit is the perception of wrestling. And whether it's fair or not, I mean, that, I don't know. It's like, I'll tell you right now, it's very hard for me to trust a survey commissioned by the WWF. So I'll just leave it at that. I mean, that's the reality.
Especially when it totally contradicts a Gallup poll survey.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's not like the Gallup poll is flawless. But of the two, yeah, I would have to trust it wasn't paid for by the WWF. It's independent. And it's independent. Also, let's see, on the Wahoo McDaniel question yesterday, on our poll here, 67% thought Wahoo should be in the Hall of Fame and 33% didn't, which was actually kind of interesting, I guess. And also today we got some questions about the XFL. Do you think that Vince should go for a second season? There's a bunch of different options up there. So if you want to vote on the XFL, I can do that. Okay, this is how could Bret Hart be so perceptive about Shawn Michaels, yet he still couldn't understand that Hogan held him back in WCW? You know something about that? Okay. Actually, last night's, not just last night's show, every show that we do when we have a wrestling guest on, I don't want to say last night because that's probably not fair. There are many guests we have on this show that I know personally, and that I will ask them a question knowing the answer, and then they'll say the exact opposite thing because they know that everyone's listening, including, people who may hold the key to their future. And Bret Hart is not a stupid guy. If he ever wants to do anything in wrestling, it is better to be Hulk Hogan's friend than Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon are people that, I mean, and I'm more Hogan than Vince, I will say that. I could tell you wrestlers will rip the hell out of Hogan, especially guys that are in WCW. But the minute it would be in public, they will kiss his ass unmercifully because of the feeling that somehow Hogan's going to wind up in power, and we sure as hell don't want to burn that bridge. And I mean, that's the reality. That's one of the things why, I don't know. The other night we had Joe Silva on Monday, and I asked him about the judging, and I sort of half-ass expected this defense of that why Randy Couture won, and then he did the exact opposite and just said exactly what he thought in detail, explaining, and not necessarily not knocking the judging, and I was like,
but just not agreeing.
Not agreeing, and I go, if this was. And this is not a knock on anyone in wrestling, but the vice president of talent relations, which I guess would be like the equivalent in WWF or WCW or whomever, and it's not quite the exact same thing. But if there was a main event on a pay-per-view that they thought was a really dumb idea, they are not going to come on the show and go, you know what? And it's not a good analogy. It's only the best one I can come up with at the moment without thinking hard. But if there were something like that, and this go, I totally disagree. I think that the booking committee made a big mistake on this pay-per-view main event. It was just a bad idea. So, I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting.
But just one of the things for me yesterday was someone called and asked Bobby Heenan about, what do you think about Stephanie and Shane growing up and being on TV and all that? And I thought, maybe I should ask Bobby what he thinks of Vince McMahon putting his own daughter on TV in a role where fans chant slut at her. But then I realized, why bother asking this question? But this guy's already said he wants a job with the WWF. What's he going to run down Vince and say it's appalling? Of course not.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. There's only one place to go. And maybe there's another. I mean, what's he going to do? Run down? I mean, and this is not, anything against Bobby or anything, but, I mean, what's he going to do? Go run down Hogan in case Hogan may have something, that comes up? He still wants to work. I mean, the guys that will be, what's funny is the guys who will be on the show, the most honest, are the ones who in their mind have decided. Are finished. They are never going to go back. Who was Max Payne? Tom Zink's an entertainer though. But Tom Zink is one of them. But Max Payne is another one where you can tell that he will not go back. He knows he will not go back. He knows no one will take him back, so he can say whatever he wants about. Bad News Allen's another one. Yep. I mean, Bad News Allen's got 2 knee replacements. He ain't going back. So Bad News Allen. I mean, he's pretty brutally honest. Those kind of guys. So anyway, where was I going with all that other than... We got another guy who I don't expect to ever see wrestle again. And there are very few people I would say that about. But Nick Bockwinkel is one of them. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. How about yourself?
Doing really, really good, Nick. We've been wanting to get you on this ever since we started doing the show.
Now, this show goes what, when, where, and how?
This is internet audio, goes all over the country and actually all over the world on the computer. And there's a lot of listeners in anyone with a computer. There's a lot of listeners in the UK. I know that.
I got you.
So.
They pay for it?
No. You just turn on your computer and log on.
God damn. So we're just doing this free.
Just doing it free. Yeah, and there are economics to this that someday someone will figure out. But one of the reasons why all the .coms are going out of business is because they figured out great uses of technology, but not great ways to make money off technology. There's so much for free, and everyone's losing their asses producing it.
God love them.
Yeah, I guess. We should enjoy it while it's there. But, Nick, how's life been for you?
Can't complain except the fact that about 3 out of 4 times my wife beats me on the golf course, and there just isn't much I can do about it. I sneeze and I yell in the backswing, but that doesn't seem to make any difference except get her hot.
Now you're living in Vegas, right?
Living in Las Vegas, correct.
And
about 2.5, 3 years ago.
Any reason why?
Basically, she's got 3 brothers that live here. They're golfers as well, and she's close to them. And living up in Minnesota all the years that we did, we were not around family, and my family is in Hawaii. So it was basically the presumption was that because we had owned the condominium down in Florida for years, and ultimately thought we might move out there, and then when her family moved here we are.
Your career is really interesting because as I was thinking back on it, you started, and actually because of your father, had some pretty decent television exposure very, very young. And then at the other end, probably when you were in your 50s, early 50s, you may have been as good as any wrestler that I can ever recall in their 50s inside the ring as far as you were in shape. You're a great worker. I mean, a lot of people remember you did a 60-minute match in late 86 with Kurt Hennig that was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. You were well into your 50s by then, and I mean, you had whatever this would be. So you had 35 years in the ring, as a top performer. I mean, you didn't. One thing we would say about you is when you left, you weren't one of those guys who left a shell of what they once were.
No, I wasn't, thank God, for whatever reason. My contention was, as long as I was going to stay, I wanted to be as first class as I could. Having been second generation, and sitting in dressing rooms from the time I was a little guy through my teen years, I saw all the ramifications, all the scenarios, all the different type personalities, all the different type promoters and matchmakers and bookers, and saw the sad stories that went along with all this. And I think subconsciously, when it was only me and me alone that decided when it was time to bow out, and I did. And nobody asked me. My family, I think, had been pushing on me for 4 or 5 years, only because even though I wasn't in very good shape, like you said, they just statistically, because any move could have broken an arm or a leg, could have broken a neck, and then what have you got? I guess probably the one reason why so many of the boys really the hair just curls up in the back of their neck when they go, listen, they're all fake. God bless you. Maybe promotions got control of things, but what takes place in the ring is so horrendously dangerous and so chancy. I just thank the dear Lord that He allowed me to get through just hobbling around the way I am now.
How do you do as far as injuries during your career, and how are you holding up now?
Well, my ankle is all puffed up and pregnant, won't deliver. And the most I can do with that is fuse it. It's slowly self-fusing, so to speak. My two knees, they're in very poor shape. Technically speaking, the rest of my body seems to be holding up fairly well. So that's where I'm at, And like I say, I thank the dear Lord. I had a very full career, and I would have loved to have made the kind of money that the boys made in these last 10, 15 years, but, what are you going to do? I mean, that's life in the big city. Somebody's going to look back upon this time and say, those poor guys in the 90s and the early 2000s, they didn't make anything, So, who knows?
What's your thoughts as far as, you've seen wrestling evolve from, from childhood when your father was doing it,
sure,
to what it is now. I mean, it's evolved and evolved and evolved and evolved. I mean, what are your thoughts as far as its current state and different points of evolution, and what do you think were the key points, like I say, in the last 50-plus years of wrestling history?
Ironically, if one does look back, it has been changing dramatically. I was born in 34, so and I was just a youngster when television first came on the scene, which I think at that point, and even before then, I mean, there were those who bitched years back, I'd say, and this must have been sometime in the late 20s or 30s, when somebody ran into the ropes and came off and threw a tackle, and some of the old-timers were bitching like, well, what the hell was that? What are they doing that for? And so then you had the evolution I looked at a match that's on, somebody had it on video. It was my dad and Freddie Blassie, I think, against Pazdak and Charlie Moto. And I watched it, and I just said to myself, in all honesty, I said, God, how boring. But then slowly the thing kept creeping up. You had the air that came in with Buddy Rogers, and were the high spots, and the guys, being far more agile, doing a lot more of the, if nothing else, the backdrops, the drop kicks, the flying mares, the arm drags in rapid succession. So that, and that was, in a sense, that was kind of where the beginning of my career was. And so to say it has gone to where it has, at one point you had a little bit of storyline and a lot of wrestling. Today you must have about 65, 70% of storyline, and with a little wrestling to support it. I'm not quite sure at what point we may just have a bunch of muscleheads that will only make a few moves and do a lot of conversation. And yet at the same time, my admiration for the guys in the ring today is total and completely respectful, because I see the moves that the guys make today, and I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, they're horrendous. They're gorgeous moves. They're terrific moves, and they're all highly dangerous, highly volatile. And I see the chances these guys take with their bodies today. The only thing I guess I could question about them is their little bit of sanity as to some of the stuff that they try.
How closely do you follow it now?
Not real close. I don't religiously turn it on. It's more when I'm kind of flipping through the channels that I happen to pick something up. That's in all honesty. Or if I know, for instance, that some of my friends are going to be seen, whatever, I might want to peek in on them. But I really don't.
What, as far as we were talking about, when you watch it, and you're someone who has experience of over 30 years in the ring, of doing a style that certainly was not as dangerous as the style now,
right.
And you're, obviously, as you talk about paying the price, and you were a smart worker. I mean, I remember watching your matches, and, one thing, I mean, you were, if people watch the old tapes, I mean, you never did anything that, I would say, didn't make sense within the context of a match, and the way you got over was building the match. It's a totally different thing than what they do today.
Correct.
What do you think? So sometimes, when you're in your 20s, and you've been, well, sometimes when we get old, we get smart, and sometimes we don't. But, when you're in your 20s, I remember I would watch wrestling, and I'd watch guys do all these spots, and I would be really, really impressed. And then when I got a little bit older and my elbows started hurting and my knees started hurting, and I would watch that, like someone take a chair shot to the head, and I wouldn't be happy. And I would just go, God, I wish they just wouldn't do that, rather than, wow, what an awesome chair shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you said you wish they wouldn't do that, in what context were you thinking there?
Well, I don't see them hurt.
No, this is true. If you talk to the Gagnes, both of them, who I've occasionally hit with a chair, they'll tell you, oh, how wonderful it was, and how many days the knot on their head lasted. You might say, I guess I wasn't real good at it. So rather than being not good at it, I wanted to do it as professionally as I could, and I did. So, no, I know, the guys today, that's the part of it that really, I think, befuddles me. I do get a lot of commentary from people who watch it on TV and who openly say, my God, some of the things they do in that ring. That much is something that is to be seen by a number of people, by so many people that are truly aware. And like I say, their bodies, look at Foley. I mean, here was a guy that wanted to be a star so that the girls would love him, and I mean, he did it completely for an ego trip, so to speak, and yet at the same time, he's such a nice person, and to think that how he pushed himself through things. And a perfect example, when I was commissioner for WCW back in the early 90s, somebody pointed Foley out to me, and he says, Nick, you got to watch this guy and maybe talk to him afterwards. And this was somebody who cared. I don't know if it was Paul Orndorff or Arn Anderson or, somebody who was close to the profession. But they were there all the time, so they thought maybe a word from me might be impressive. So I watched him, and I watched this guy leap off the edge of the apron to drop an elbow on somebody who rolled out of the way, and this whole body went splat, like a large piece of beef falling onto the cold cement. So when he came back in later on, I pulled him off to the side, and I said, just a thought or two. I says, the dear Lord only gave you one body. I says, and when you hit that floor, and I said, you can't get up, and you can't go back in that ring. I said, they're just going to get a big hook around your ankle and drag your flesh off and go get another body. I said, so God bless you. I says, do what you feel you got to do. I says, but because those guys don't care. And I said, try to take care of yourself. And he was very gracious and very nice. And he said, oh, thank you very much. I sure appreciate it, Mr. Bockwinkel. And so what? Nick is what? 35 years old.
35, maybe almost 36.
Yeah, and he's done.
Oh yeah, he's done.
Yeah.
He's done.
I mean, one of our big concerns is like the long-term damage, because like Dave was talking about earlier, guys didn't take as much punishment back then, and they're paying for it now. And we just look at guys nowadays who are taking 10 times the punishment, and just wonder where they're going to be at that age.
I have no idea. All I can say is, one, I hope they're saving their money, and two, as age creeps up on all of us, we can't get around as much as we'd like to. There's no question whatsoever. These guys, I mean, Christ, they're 40 years old. They're probably going to be in wheelchairs. I mean, like what? Stone Cold has had what? A neck operation?
Mm-hmm.
Neck operation, both knees.
Bad knees.
Yeah. He's wearing braces on his knees, and I'm not quite sure. I don't know if the limelight or the money is that much of an appeal or an attraction. Like I say, I just hope these guys have saved their money, because they're gonna need nursing help to get through the rest of their life.
There was an article in Sports Illustrated this week about football players that was similar to that, and that was a lot of the guys that would have been from like your generation and younger that played in the NFL, and the NFL is more dangerous now than it was then too, because it's bigger bodies running faster with collisions. And a lot of these guys are in really rough shape with the I mean, there's the extreme examples, like a Dynamite Kid who's in a wheelchair, but the arthritis, I mean, that's something that pretty much everyone's living with.
Well, and then God bless. I mean, Dynamite Kid was just such a tremendous talent, but then he was part of that 20-year span where all these guys were doing steroids because they all wanted to be bigger and better. They were also doing uppers in the morning to get them going, and then downers at night. They were living in the fast lane. Plus, they were putting their bodies through the extremes that they were. And when I was an agent for a year and a half up in New York, and things had really settled down by the time I came on board. And they used to have two agents go to a town because there would be so many little minuscule problems because of the health conditions of some of the guys. And I remember we got to Frisco one day, and I just got to my room, and somebody says, Dynamite Kid collapsed on the escalator at the airport. And I went, oh, my God, so boom. Me and Jack Lanza go running off to go do whatever it was we had to go do. So, I don't know to what degree these guys push themselves today. But when you see a mass of people getting into the ring, and all of them have got bodies that are 9s and 10s, or close to it, they're definitely in the fast lane, and the strain of the travel has got to be horrendous as well.
Now, looking back, and at the decision when you made to quit,
yes.
Do you think it was too early, too late, or the right time? Looking back now,
I'm going to guess, only looking back, that I think it possibly was at the right time. One of the things I saw definitely happening is I didn't see the commitment and the desire on the part of Vern Gagne and the AWA to keep the whole ball rolling, to battle Vince, so to speak, at the level Vince was commanding the battle to be. And at the same time, I was realistic enough to know here I was. I quit in October of '87, and I was, I think, 52 years old. And regardless of what condition I was in and how well I could perform, why does Vince McMahon want a 52-year-old that's been a star? What's he got to go with him? There was no longevity in me, and so there was no other place to go. I mean, when I finally retired, if you didn't go with the WWF, by that time, things were already started to head in a specific direction. Who's going to take me, and how much money am I going to make a week, and how hard am I going to travel, and for who, for what, for when, and why? So the decision was totally mine. And the rationale, and I told Gagne when I decided to retire. I told him a good 4 months before I was going to retire. I says a little later this year, I says I'm going to hang it up. And I left, and I went. I had a 4-week trip to Japan that was coming up, and I said when I finish up in Japan, I'm done. And I said, and I have no idea quite what I'm going to do when I get through. I says, if somebody wants to hire me in a office official capacity, I said, then fine. I says, I will consider that, whether it's with you or whether it's with Vince McMahon or whoever it might be. And that was my decision. And that's the way I did it.
Did you have any pangs? Because, one of the things, a lot of wrestlers talk about retiring. Many of them even do. And the percentage of them that actually stay retired is incredibly small. Yeah, and you're with the exception where you are also on that scale is the ones who do stay retired. Like we'll talk about it, Bret Hart are the ones who physically really, they really better stay retired because of the neurological problem, or a guy like Dynamite Kid who physically couldn't even get in the ring, so he had to retire. People were forced by injuries. Whereas you were a guy who was, you were older, but you were still in shape. You were main eventing till the end of your career, correct. So it wasn't like you had moved down to a preliminary guy. It wasn't as if you couldn't make money in wrestling, but you walked away and didn't go back.
Well, and I guess egotistically, I had a little of that, and professional pride, and I didn't. When I was a kid, like I say, at 12, 13, 14 years old, sitting in dressing rooms, I saw a whole lot of guys that just hung in there trying to squeeze the last buck that they could have out of the wrestling business. And in a sense, there were some of them who had great reputations and had made a lot of money. And, when you get to that point, it can be very demeaning, the demands that are made on you. And I guess I just didn't want to do that. I just said, cut it off clean and get on with the rest of your life. And consequently, that's why I did what I did, and I did it the way I did it.
Before we go on, because there's one question a lot of people ask, towards the latter part of your career, there's a match with you and Stan Hansen that actually didn't take place in Denver, where the title was supposed to switch. What happened that night?
It was nothing. It was simple. Hansen, God bless him, tremendous credit to the profession, but Hansen and our good friend Frank Brody were. I've always said, they all started in West Texas with the Funks and Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes. They had one sane one. They had Tito Santana, but I after having had worked there one time, I spent about 8 months there in the Amarillo territory. I figured out it must have been in the water, because all of those guys. They were all strange ducks to some extent. Terry and Dory. Terry was, of course, always the absurd, reaching out on the fringe constantly, but a great man. And Dory, of course, was a great worker, and his dad was too. But for whatever reason, Stan and Frank, they really did not care for what the profession demanded. And the profession demanded that theoretically the two of you are going to go in the ring. You're going to take your skills and your ability, and you're going to combine them and put it together to tell a hell of a story and make for a hell of a wrestling match. That was not part of the mentality of Stan and Brody. And Stan was recalcitrant, and Stan only wanted to do what Stan wanted to do. Now, if you're 6'4" or 5", as Stan was, and weighed about 290 pounds, and God bless him, he was always in shape. The man could really get up and hustle and go. And you had a tough time, holding him down. I mean, he was one hell of a bull. And but Stan, God bless him, he'd get in the ring, and if you knew you were working with him, protect yourself, because this guy really, I think he cared, but he didn't care. And he was only concerned about his image and his whole scenario. And so on that one night in Denver, when I was informed what was going to take place, I said, really? To the people who were telling me. And bigger than hell, when the statement was made to Mr. Hansen just looked, didn't say anything. Next thing we know, he had packed his bag and left the building.
Now, how did you guys get the belt back? Because he took the belt with him in Japan, right?
Well, that was ironic, and it's ironic that we talk about that, because I just had a meeting today at the Luxor Hotel with a fellow by the name of Akagi from Japan, who I'm helped getting some videotapes over to for the Japanese, one of the Japanese networks over there. And I took the belt with me to the lunch and showed it to him, and he's standing in front of a big obelisk inside the Luxor lobby, and that's the belt. And the history on that belt, which is kind of unique, but Hansen took the belt with him that night and left. And he was going to Japan, I think, in a couple of days, and so he wanted to make sure he still had that belt when he was in Japan. And I guess it was probably about a month later, because he had been constantly claiming himself to be the AWA heavyweight champion and using the belt. And then, of course, an attorney wrote him a letter, and Stan always liked keeping a real close track of his nickels. Did not take well to a possibility of a lawsuit, which means he'd have to go out and hire an attorney. And so I think he politely took the belt out into the driveway and ran his pickup back and forth over it 2 or 3 times. And it was kind of, the belts have a natural curve to them. And this one had a ripple and a crink right in the middle of it, and it was flattened. And then it was sent back in an express mail envelope. And so when they got it back to the office, by this time, knowing that Stan had it and what was taking place, they had ordered a new belt, so there was a new one that came into the picture back then in '87. And so there was basically this broken up piece of crap laying on the table. And so Wally Carbo says, Nick, he says, take it if you want it. I said, yeah. I says, since it was made up originally for me, and I says, I was the last person, one of the last people to have it, I said, yeah, I'll take it. So I took it to a jeweler friend of mine who restored it to a fair degree, and I'm going to sell it this year.
Mm-hmm. So
I'll sell it on the internet, so get the people ready.
We do have a question about the Foley book that I didn't answer. So we had a lot of comments on the Foley book. We'll try to get to those tomorrow. Anyway, I'm not sure you said what part of the Foley is good book made. You put the book down. It wasn't the part about the legal world and journalism being faker than wrestling. Was it the part about the PTC? Actually, I haven't read the part about the PTC yet. But the part where where I put it down was actually when he was talking about his hobby, which is amusement parks, and he loves amusement parks, and he was going on and on about amusement parks. And as I started reading about it, somewhere in there I was going like, you know what?
You decided to go to Disneyland.
No, I just said, I'm just not that into amusement parks. So I put it down for a little while, and I felt really bad because, aside from that, I liked the guy, and I never put down his other book once, and I almost felt guilty about putting it down, but I just put it down and just go, I can't read more about amusement parks than, he just did twice as much on amusement parks as I could handle. Then I picked it up and read the rest of it, so that was the point. Anyway, let me get to a couple of questions for Nick. When you were in WCW in the mid-'90s, there were a couple of guys there like Cactus Jack, Steve Austin, Terror Rising, or John Paul Levesque, who is now Triple H, who all became huge stars. And actually, Cactus Jack kind of quit WCW for WWF. Steve Austin was actually fired, which is in hindsight, one of the great moves a wrestling promoter's ever made in history. And Triple H actually left because he wanted to go to WWF and did. At that time, what did you think of those three guys?
I thought there was no question in my mind. I saw him as talent. Undoubtedly, I'm not quite sure the people in charge at that time, how they saw him. Of course, when I came on board, Eric Bischoff was the person that, of course, he was the one who tried to sell me on the idea that I should be the commissioner. And in reality, I knew that it was Flair, it was Arn Anderson, it was Paul Orndorff, people of that caliber who said that this would be a great guy for a commissioner. And of course, Bischoff, who had worked in Gagne's office, was stone broke for most of his life until he got his breakdown in Atlanta. I think he wants to take credit for having brought me in, which really, in all reality, it wasn't true. But those three guys who you just mentioned, excellent pieces of talent. I mean, Austin, I saw him, and I'm watching the whole scenario taking place, and I'm saying, God, they're not utilizing what they've got here. Now, I got to say, Foley was an enigma, and to this day, I want anybody else to explain it any differently than that. Here was a guy whose body we never saw, but for whatever reason, he went out there, busted his ass, and had charisma all unto himself in his own strange way. And Triple H, same thing. I mean, you have to sit back and just look at the talent and visualize, what you potentially think it can become. But I'm not so sure that Bischoff or whoever was doing things in charge had that good of a judgment call. And consequently, they let him go. And, only to find out that they came back to haunt him.
There was one of the more famous matches of your career was in 1983. Was it? I guess it would have been the St. Paul Civic Center with Hulk Hogan, where you did the overflow and you did the closed circuit.
Right.
Was that match? I mean, in hindsight, what were the thoughts as far as? Were there any thoughts of giving Hogan the title at that point in time?
I am sure that it possibly was, but the thing is, you got to understand something. When somebody's got the license plate, let's say, even in the boxing world, of course, now they've got so many different associations, it hardly matters. But when you've only got 2 or 3 big associations, if somebody can put up enough money, and all of a sudden, that's, I think, probably one of the biggest feathers in my cap was the fact that I went to Tennessee to wrestle in the NWA. I went to Texas, which was NWA country. I went to Georgia and to Florida and to the Carolinas to wrestle in NWA country as the AWA heavyweight champion. And consequently, none of the NWA people were coming up, so to speak, into the AWA country, nor was WWF coming to ours. And I'm sure there was no question Gagne felt that the title was in good hands with me. Wally Carbo always used to tell me, he says, Nick, no 2 counts. He says, get the shoulder up on 1. And
really?
And that was just to be a precaution, because if another territory wanted to, just as the Bret Hart match that took place up with
Shawn Michaels.
Shawn Michaels in Montreal, 1, 2, 3, so to speak. Oh, he gave up. I mean, that when you all of a sudden beat the top man from another alliance, well, what happens to the alliance? Because you're holding the license plate, so to speak, at least technically, and so that there was a lot of trust placed in me, and I think a lot of respect paid to me that was never tried. And so that was one of the unique things about at that time. And I feel very good about that. I mean, it's funny. I did not respect, so to speak, or admire or credit myself as much at the time that I was doing the things I was doing as I do now that I've got perspective and I can look back 15 years and go, Jesus Christ. I mean, they could have tried to beat me any place. If I didn't get my shoulder up quick enough, And then what's Gagne and Wally Carbo going to do? What's the AWA going to do? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And that could have taken place. And fortuitously, my talent, the respect I think I commanded within the profession, and the ability, and how well I pleased the people that I worked with and for, I think that was respect paid back to me.
Now, but when Hogan started getting really hot as a draw, did they ever come to you and go like, you know, we're going to do the big chase and eventually he's going to beat you, or did it never even get that far?
I think there was great consideration, but at the same time that Hogan was flying really high in the AWA, it was at the same time that his movie came out with Stallone, and so he was building up tremendous momentum, and there's no question in my mind he really and truly was interested in the AWA belt. But at the same time, it's kind of like giving a franchise to somebody, just a individual. You're handing him the whole franchise, and I don't think that they felt they could trust him. I really think that's possibly what was the scenario there.
Did you think Japan had anything to do with it? Because I know, you know, Verne had to deal with Baba. You went to Baba as AWA champion many times, and Hogan had to deal with Inoki, who Verne had no business with. Because that's kind of what I thought was always like a sticking point there.
That too. You know, I mean, there was no question. The agreement between the AWA and Baba's side was definitely significant, and the fact that there was none, so to speak, between the AWA and Inoki. And so all those things had to be taken into consideration, because it would have created a new whole stumbling block for the AWA if all of a sudden, So I mean, I'm sure that the AWA people took that into consideration and said, well, hey, if all of a sudden Hogan's champion, now what do we do? Are we aligned with Inoki and we just say screw off to Baba? So that I'm sure that was all part of it there.
Did you ever do an episode of Hawaii Five-0?
Pardon?
Did you ever do an episode of Hawaii Five-0? Somebody wrote in that.
And the Monkeys.
I know he did the Monkeys because I remember that.
Yeah. Those were earlier days before I had, so to speak, come into my own, and I was going through a divorce with my first wife, and being from Southern California, and I had a number of people that were in the movie industry, and they would say to me, Nick, he said, you get a Screen Extras card and nothing else, man. You can pick up all sorts of cash just doing small extra bits. And that's exactly what took place.
Let's go to Weston, Virginia. Wes, you're first up with Nick Bockwinkel.
Hi, guys. How's it going?
Hey. Going good.
Mr. Bockwinkel, the first question I had was a two-part. Obviously, in regards to Hogan, he was a big star at the time when he was in the AWA, but did you think that he would turn into, considering limited skill in the ring, do you think he'd become as big as he did? And also, when McMahon came in 82 and 83, and what did you think when he started taking a lot of the top guys? And did he approach you about coming to the WWF at that time?
McMahon never approached me, and I think, I'm going to guess the reason being is he had a number of people that he was able to, quote, steal away from the AWA. And when you stop and look at it, compliment to Vince McMahon. I mean, he wanted good, quality, talented people, and so he raided wherever there were. So when you start looking at Gene Okerlund, Bobby Heenan, Blackjack Lanza, if I was building an organization, I'd want those people first right off the bat because they were that good. They were that talented. And I know Bobby had a real tough time making the transition. This was, of course, after Hogan had already gone and Vince had already, so to speak, declared, that it was open warfare, and he was going to do things with the WWF that nobody else had ever done. One of the things that's very interesting that most people wouldn't even know is that Vince McMahon Sr., after just about the time that Vince Jr. was technically purchasing the WWF, or just a little bit before that, he told Wally Carbo, he says, Wally, sell out, get out now, because the kid's going to do things, and he's going to really upset the apple cart. And Wally personally told me that himself. So I knew this was, definitely coming down the road. And as far as Vince stealing the talent that he did, what the hell? I mean, he wants to produce a product, and he only wants to get the best talent that he can. The falsity of the fact that all these different organizations said, well, you got to have loyalty. Well, mind you, even looking back, yeah, they were loyal to me as long as I was drawing them money. They were loyal to me as long as I was producing for them. When I couldn't produce for them, and I couldn't make them money, ironically, I think the loyalty would have been very thin. So that's
anything else, Wes?
Pardon? So that's the first part. So what was the other part?
The part about Hulk Hogan. Were you surprised maybe he became as big as he did, considering his limited?
No, I wasn't, because two things. He got a push. There's no question in the AWA, and then of course his movie came out at the same time, and you could sense his charisma. You could sense his getting over the way he did, and to me, I felt that so that when Hogan, when he went to New York, and I had known a lot of the things that were going to be taking place, I figured as much. I mean, and then Vince, of course, was elevating television to its next level, and just as Gorgeous George was in the late 40s and the early 50s, everything goes around, comes around. Here we are now, and then you had Rogers for a period of time there, and now we go about, 35, 40 years later, and there's this next surge to come along, and it was Hulk Hogan. And it was understandable, and especially the way Vince did it.
Anything else, Wes?
Yeah, just one more. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Bockwinkel, in regards to WCW and your stay, there was always the talk about too many Chiefs and not enough Indians. In terms of the Time Warner just sold, were you surprised at that? I mean, considering, during your stay there, were there things you
surprised that it ended up with where we are today, where it's really one man controlling the entire business in North America?
Not really. I'm sad about it, and the reason I'm sad about it is because it diminishes the available wrestling spots for the boys. I think that's one of the things that really hurts in my heart a little bit. Because of my love and loyalty to the business, was the fact that when you had the regional territories, God, there were so many guys employed that legitimately what they earned per week was enough to support a family and allow them to do what they wanted to do, let alone for a number of us that made even better money. And so that as the diminishing of the territories went away and it came down to 2 territories, you just kind of go, oh, God, I mean, when you figure how many active wrestlers there were, so to speak, on a payroll back then, and how many active wrestlers there are on a payroll today, it's a real sad state of affairs, and that's what the consolidation going into one organization has meant. So that part breaks my heart in that respect. Could we see that this was going to take place? I have to credit Terry Funk. Terry Funk in the early 70s, we were someplace, we could have been in Japan together or wherever, and he said ultimately, the business is going to come down to where there will only be 2 or 3 territories in the United States, or 2 or 3 organizations. And of course, he was right on the money at that time. And ironically, if you would have taken a map of the United States, and you would have stuck a little pin into the city that was the headquarters of every little territory that the United States had, let's say, in 1930. And then you would have looked at that map at 40. And then you would have looked at that map in 1950. And you would have looked at that map in 1960. And in 1970, you would have seen exactly what was taking place. The pins were disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Should we go to break right now, Al? Okay, we'll take Alex and we're going to go to break. Alex, what's up?
Hello, Brian.
Hey, what's going on?
Heard, CWA launched this Saturday in Hot Diesel. It was a wild show. Paramedic and Crazy Boy put on a good show. But at the end, it was like an ECW show, and everybody running in and brawling all over the building. Tyron Ganetti's match was also good.
Alex, do you have anything for Nick?
Yes, Mr. Bockwinkel.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to learn how to be a wrestler,
God bless you.
What should a young guy like me do to get into the business today?
Pick the right parents.
To first of all, accept the fact that what you want to do, well, let's see, you want to say you want to get into the business. You want to become, quote, a wrestler.
Hello?
Yeah, you there?
Yeah.
Okay. It's simple enough of what your desire is. And you can go to any number of schools. In fact, coming up here real soon, in about 2 months, there's a Las Vegas Wrestling Academy that is being...
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you a question, another one?
Get rid of him. We got to go to a break. Bye.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Get a phone. That's another good piece of advice.
On WrestlingObserver.com, there's always information on the most recent issue and ordering information on how to get both Figure 4 Weekly, which Brian Alvarez puts out, which is the funniest stuff on wrestling. It's funnier than Mick Foley's book, and I like Mick Foley's book a lot, but it's funnier. And and also probably probably more perceptive, or equally as perceptive. I don't know. Mick Foley's book's pretty perceptive, don't you think?
Yeah, so far it's been good.
Well, you mentioned Mick Foley's book. Are you speaking of the first book, or is there a second book?
The second book just came out Tuesday. So we're talking about the second book.
Oh, second book, huh?
Yeah. First book did great.
What does he have to say in the second book?
He's just mainly talking about his career and kind of trying to... I think
issues in wrestling that have gotten a lot of negative publicity, and I guess trying to... I shouldn't say anything because I haven't got that far yet, but probably trying to put a little bit of a spin on it.
You know, again, because there's been a lot of negative publicity on wrestling in the last 2 years.
And wrestling,
I know there's been longer than that too, but it's a different kind of negative publicity. I mean, when you were wrestling, it was more of the, whether it was a sport or not. I mean, now it's more like, it's good for children to watch.
Exactly, all the sexual overtones and
exactly
all the vulgarity, and what is really kind of sad is because. Even though many people crash, knock the wrestling in that respect, at the same time, when you start to look at some of the other TV shows, Sex and the City, I saw that one time for the first time, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing, the language I was hearing, and I said, my God, this is XXX rated, and it's on
HBO and stuff. But it is HBO, it is subscription TV. So
I realize that, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's still going out over the airwaves, and if somebody's house is hooked up to it and you've got children,
There's porn.
And you can find out how to get it on HBO, whether they're up or not.
That's right.
The last gentleman that was asking about he wanted to be a wrestler, is he still there or did he go?
No, he's long gone. In fact, he will never be back. He will never be back. He has just passed away.
I see. Okay. Because something new that is coming up, my first involvement in a wrestling school.
Oh.
And there's a gentleman by the name of Gary Mills who is putting up the money for a Las Vegas Wrestling Academy that is going to be here in Vegas, and he's coming out with an ad. It's going to be on WOW Magazine on the back page with an application and the whole thing. So I guess if Dory Funk can do things down in Ocala, Florida, whatever and what have you, and so he's asked me to be affiliated with the thing, and I says, oh, I will be. I says, but nothing physical. I says, I'm going to teach them all the mental aspect of what they got to do.
That's a really good idea, actually, have the ad be an actual application for the school.
Yeah, well, it only takes one page and takes the bottom half of the page.
I'll tell you, the one thing in the schools, not all the schools, but in a lot of the schools that's lacking, and that these guys need more than almost anything, is preparation on doing promos. Because we got a lot of guys with great bodies. We got a lot of guys who can do a lot of impressive stuff. But if you can't do the promo now, I mean, my God, it's so important now. Yeah.
Well, it's more. I always felt it was extremely important. I would have to say, Mick Foley is proof of the pudding. I mean, if you were to put down the guy's body, his ability in the ring, and the guy's television demeanor. Now, if those are the three things that make up a talent, they all have to be at a pretty fair percentage. Foley really didn't have much of a body, and his ability in the ring, in a sense, was limited at first. But God bless him, he had the charisma. And even though, maybe some of the stuff he did may have seemed bizarre, bizarre works. But the thing was, the guy, he was willing to sacrifice himself far, far more than I think most sane people would.
The thing about him, too, that a lot of guys, because he's become a hero to a lot of guys that want to be wrestlers because...
Oh, I know.
And the reason is it's like an average kid cannot relate to being like The Rock.
No.
I mean, unless they were like, the high school football superstar who's 6'5", 250, good body, played college football. That's out of the reach of the average person. Mick Foley, you look at Mick Foley and go,
You're correct.
I got a body like that. I'm as good looking as he is. But what they forget is that his interview ability is so off the charts good, and it's not just the fact that he was willing to be hit on the head with, or take thumbtacks.
Well,
he could take all those thumbtacks without
and he could work. He knew where to put those things in a match to make him mean something, as opposed to just killing himself the entire time.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, if somebody were to come to me and say, if the guy didn't have a great body, and but if he had the desire to pursue it, who am I to say, no, you can't do that, you'll never make it? I mean, Foley, in a sense, is like you just pointed out. He gives every guy the chance.
Let's go to Alan in Florida. Alan, what's going on?
Hi, what's going on, Dave?
Not
it's a pleasure to talk to Nick.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you ever been involved in a match where the opponent took liberties, kind of deviated from the promoter's predetermined plan?
Not really. Not to any consequence.
Mm-hmm.
The thought pattern back in those days was somebody got cute.
Right.
And cute could come in any number of different capacities.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many wrestling holes that if you allow your body to have that hole put on them, you can't go anyplace. You can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you are tied up in a knot, as the old expression goes. And I think that is why back then everybody had to have some wrestling ability, and especially if you were working on top, because you would always have those guys who had some ability but who were not in the favor of the promotion, who on occasion would like to be cute, and they would try something if they could, and you had to pretty much show them going to be a hefty price tag if you want to be cute again, and so it was all very instantaneous and took place very quickly, and it was pretty much who was willing to go up to the wall.
What was it like working with Larry Zbyszko?
Hey, Alan, can you back away from the phone a little bit? You're killing me there.
Sorry. What was it like working with Larry Zbyszko?
He was excellent. He was a very good talent.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Were you really close outside the ring?
Not overly, but always a very respectful relationship with Larry. Always enjoyed his work and his professionalism and his dedication to the business.
I remember his promos when he feuded with you. That guy was doing some great promos.
I inspired him. What is kind of fun is that you're working with people who do have egos. And by having those egos, you can really scratch them a little bit, and it doesn't take very much scratching to get through to blood. And then all of a sudden, they get very inspired.
What was it like teaming with your dad early on? And how long did you do that for?
Pardon?
How long did you team with him for?
Not a real long time, say maybe for about a year, and I was very young in my career. My first 3 years would have been about his last 2 or 3 years, Mm-hmm. And interesting, only in the sense that you are not only with the teacher, you are in the ring with the teacher at the very same moment. And so he would admonish me quite well and straighten me out, and he was never afraid, so to speak, to slap me up alongside the head. And I love to tell the story, and all of us who are young guys, and I don't know if this has happened to girls, but when you're 15 years old and you've got your first driver's permit, and your dad's letting you drive, right? And you were just man, it was so exciting. I mean, it was just the adrenaline rush was just so heavy. And my dad would have his arm across the back of the car seat, because back those days they hadn't gone to bucket seats yet, except in sports cars. And so he'd have his arm back there, and we'd be sitting at a light or something, and he'd slap me in the back of the head pretty hard. And I go, Jesus, what did I do? He says, for all the times I didn't catch you.
Oh, God.
And I think that every guy can relate to that.
What was it like for those 3 years or so? And actually, I mean, you did it much longer, but probably 3-4 years on a nightly basis as a tag team partner with Ray Stevens.
Ray was probably, and I tell this to people, he was probably one of the finest, if not the finest talent the business had. He could close his eyes and unconsciously do everything with such perfection, and just his timing, his whole sense of everything in the ring was just fabulous. When we were tag team champions, and we were both in the profession over 20 years apiece at that time, I was still learning things from him, and I've always said that if he would have concentrated and wanted to get himself in shape and everything, he would have been the top dog. But he loved to just play. He loved life. He loved his toys. He loved his women, and he lived life to his very, very fullest. And he was a great partner and a great friend, and somebody that you always enjoyed being around. It was always an up mood whenever you were in his company.
It's really interesting.
What about working with Bobby Heenan?
Bobby was just terrific as well. He is probably one of the fastest minds the world has, not just this business, the world. Bobby can be caustic. He's got a dark side to his humor, and there's reasons for that. But as far as he could get in a car, and if we were going to drive someplace and we had to go a couple hundred miles, and you could just start conversing. Now, this is talking about a guy whose company I'm in every day. And all of a sudden, you would be hysterical just conversing with him as the conversation just kept rolling on because of the comments he was making about whoever we were talking about.
It sounds familiar.
Pardon?
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, and the ironic thing about him was if somebody, he could probably sit with 5 people in front of him, and if each person would just take their own insult to him to do the challenge bit, the mental zingers and the digs and everything. What was so great about Bobby is he would tailor make his remark to you. It was either in correlation to your hair, the shirt you were wearing, the shoes you had on, the drink you had in your mouth, the glasses you were wearing. I mean, he didn't just have stock put-downs like a lot of comedians do. He cut it out just for you, and which always then made it 3 or 4 times have more impact. But his mind he was just that fast. I was sad to see that, they took him off the air. But I remember one time, him and Gene Okerlund, they did a sports banquet down in Florida someplace. And after the banquet, this guy comes up to him and he says, "Guys, you were absolutely fantastic, sensational. Can I get a copy of your script?" And they looked at him like, "There is none." And the guy said, "You got to be kidding." He says, "No." He says, "Just the 2 of us, And since they knew each other, they could play off each other so extremely well. Plus, on top of that, Heenan was a superb wrestler. He really was. I mean, he was just a terrific talent. Once that bell rang, there wasn't anything in that ring he couldn't do.
Oh, he was a great bump taker, and he was a great entertainer.
Oh, he was. I mean, he probably, as managers go over the years, I would have to say, he was probably the primo one. Yeah. He would have, if they gave a championship belt to them, he should get it.
Let's go to James in Kentucky. James, what's up?
Hey, how y'all doing?
Doing fine.
You just comment on Bobby Heenan. I don't think his career's over. I think he'll be in the WWF or WCW.
It is very possible. I mean, he's just got too much talent to offer, even at the age he is, just doing the thing. I mean, especially behind a microphone. I mean, it's so spontaneous. I remember one time he wrestled somebody, I think it was Stone Cold Austin, beat the guy, and the guy's name was, he was the lifeguard. And so then Stone Cold...
Tugboat? Who's
I don't
the
know
lifeguard?
who it was, but anyway, Stone Cold then laid down on the mat, and he kind of arched himself back up, stomach down, and he was going through like he was swimming across the mat, kicking his feet and taking swimming.
I can't hardly hear you, Nick.
Pardon?
I can't hardly hear you, sir.
Well, I'll try and talk louder.
Okay.
But anyway, he was doing Stone Cold was doing this swimming routine, laying on the mat, like he was swimming in a pool, and whoever Bobby's sidekick was, he says, "What's he doing?" And Bobby says, "Well, he can't kick sand in his face." I mean, he just would go out and beyond wherever it was.
What that would have been?
Yes, Mr. Bockwinkel?
Yes,
maybe Brian Pillman. Remember California Brian for like 2 weeks?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, go ahead, James.
Could you say hello to John out there? He's listening. He's my friend.
John, hello.
Okay, and we're going to a break. And we are going to improve the quality of our callers very soon. But anyway, in fact, right at this minute, we're going to.
Beginning immediately.
Immediately, we got huge news. The XFL just folded. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, Dave, just got word from some WWF sources. Hey, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
XFL is folding. Basically, UPN isn't picking it up, and the money losses were just too great. And an official announcement may be coming as early as 7 tonight. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to spin it, but apparently the XFL is done, from what I understand.
Yeah, there's actually something that just hit the business wire, where Vince basically said, while we believe that it's an extraordinary accomplishment to have created a new football league in what amounts to less than a year's time, we feel it is in the best interest of our shareholders and our partners to discontinue the XFL. And this is probably...
I think it's going to make 1.5 million homes very sad for me to say this, but thank God. Just for the future of wrestling.
For the future of wrestling, that was the right call, and I want to congratulate Vince for making the right call. I mean, it has to be a hard call because... Let's face it, there was so much ego on the line. I mean, we were talking about, like, the one thing that scared me about this whole thing was that Vince's ego was to stuff it in people's faces would allow him to continue for another year, which would have been just a terrible business move, and then he made the right call. So,
well, was it his call to make, or was it a matter of UPN not agreeing to pick it up or having to make it?
Yeah, actually, you're right. I'm sure that's what it is that you know what it may have been is that whole thing that we were talking about yesterday, that UPN may have said, we'll pick it up, but we're going to take 30 minutes off of SmackDown, and I think maybe at that point Vince, like Brian and I were thinking about this, we go, okay, Vince's decision, it's a lose-lose if we agree to lose. Yeah, and it's just like
half the wrestling and, losing potentially $120 million all by yourself with no partner.
Yeah. It's disastrous, and it really is the best thing for wrestling because it allows Vince to focus back. Jim Ross was talking to one of the guys from WCW he's negotiating with, and Ross told him, we need our leader back. I mean, to be honest with you, and you look at what's happened to this promotion right now, ratings down 20% on Raw over the past 5 weeks. Obviously, SmackDown is flat and sinking, also slowly in the ratings. I mean, they need to concentrate back on what they were doing, and that's something that obviously now with the XFL having gone is a huge benefit to the WWF itself.
Well, especially with the relaunching of the WCW brand. I mean, they couldn't, Vince dividing his time into a relaunched WCW brand, WWF, and trying to keep this loser XFL going. It was too much for that company to do. And the one, for wrestling, I mean, it's so important for wrestling right now because they're the only game in town that they focus on the wrestling and the key to the future of the wrestling business in this country is how well this WCW brand and eventual feud go, because if it goes flat, it's going to be a real rough period for WWF. If it doesn't, if it goes through the roof like the NWO thing, we're going to be in for a big resurgence, and if he's divided, if his mind is divided or thinking about football and how I'm going to get even with the media and all that other stuff. I mean, you're right. Just judging from everything that's been said, I think that the word probably got to him that UPN just wasn't going to take it, and he really had no choice.
Yeah, go ahead and pull out now. Other interesting piece of news I have for you guys. I talked to Mick Foley today about his book, and I really get the feeling that it wouldn't surprise me if he was headlining a pay-per-view this summer.
Against Vince?
Against whomever, probably Vince. But
probably Vince. Oh, yeah. He wants to do it.
I think it's been the plan for a while, just the fact that he's lost so much weight,
Yeah, he said that he really considered coming back at WrestleMania, but then he realized why. I mean, the show was going to do 1 million buys anyway. What's the point? He didn't add anything to that show. Mm-hmm. Is what his argument was. So basically, but he said he has not ruled out competing in a match. If it helps promote the book, and obviously the book is just out. I think that you're going to see this sooner than later, him coming back.
Well, I mean, him being a regular on TV is a positive because he's an entertaining character. I think for one match, if he does one match, I think I think it should help the buy rate. I mean, month after month, I think he'd be making a huge mistake. If it's just a one-match thing, especially with Vince McMahon.
They could even just do the one-match him and Regal for the commissionership and get it over with. He does a big match, gets a big buy rate. Probably better with Vince, but,
No, but the money's with Vince, not Regal.
Yeah.
For his match, if you're in that position.
Yeah,
Alex,
absolutely.
we got Nick Bockwinkel on. Anything you want to talk to Nick Bockwinkel about?
No, I'm good. I'm going to run, guys. Keep talking.
Okay.
I'll talk to y'all later.
Okay, thanks so much, Alex. Anyway, we just wanted to get that on, and we're going to go back to the phone calls. We got Randy in Indiana for Nick Bockwinkel. What's going on?
Hey, guys. Hi, Nick.
Hey.
Hi, Randy.
Hi. Nick, I just want to say I'm calling from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and as you're probably aware, Indiana's biggest connection to pro wrestling was Dick the Bruiser. And I was curious what your opinion was of working with the Bruiser and the Crusher, all those matches.
Dick the Bruiser was truly one of the honest-to-God characters. This was a guy that was legitimately tough as nails. He couldn't wrestle as far as wrestling ability went all that well, but as far as working ability went, he was superb. A tremendously strong egotist. He hated to be outdone, outperformed, or whatever it was. As far as talent goes in the ring, he was just. I would say he would be up there with one and all of the greats because he was just that terrific, and he had tremendous appeal. He just when you stop and think at that time, and he could get the job done, and he could become a main event no matter where he went and whatever time he went.
Yeah. And Nick, I was just curious. I go back watching pro wrestling over 25 years. And when I really got into watching wrestling in the late 70s, it was Bockwinkel, Harley Race, and Bob Backlund at the top of their respective federations. What's your take on Harley Race and Bob Backlund?
Harley Race was probably, without a doubt, one of the hardest working champions of any of them. To be the NWA champion, I remember one time I was with Jim Barnett, who was vice president of the NWA Wrestling Alliance at that time, and we were having lunch, and he pulled out this long, continuous piece of paper, and he says, I have Harley's schedule here for next year. I says, oh, really? I says, how many dates? He says, probably with the television dates that they want him for, 400.
Oh, God.
And I just went, okay. I said, that's nice. And even though back then to be the NWA champion was kind of the envy until, you started really weighing things, Harley, I mean, the NWA champion, he earned every penny that he got and deserved 10 times more. Myself, I wrestled at the most 6 months a year, so to speak, so I had every other day off. And of course, the WWF champion was really the way to go because you worked there probably about 10, 12 times a month, and you were always on top, and you didn't have to travel that far. But Harley was just a fantastic performer. And who was the other guy?
Bob Backlund.
Bob Backlund was a thing that Vince McMahon wanted. He did not want any prima donnas, and plus he didn't want to have to put up with all sorts of BS from whatever avenue challenges came from. So to let Bob get there at the top, and Bob was a tremendous amateur wrestler, and so, anybody wanted to say, well, yeah, all that wrestling is bullshit. Really? Well, why don't you step in the ring with Mr. Backlund? And who and what is your best amateur? And Bob would go out to all the colleges on the East Coast, and he would wrestle. He'd wrestle their top heavyweight and spank their butts. And the thing is, amateur wrestling is just fantastic, but it's got a very strong limitations. And once you combine professional stuff that you've learned in the professional ring, along with the amateur knowledge that you have, you become insidiously dangerous. And so Bob Backlund, and he had the demeanor of just a mild-mannered little boy, always was so low-key and never raised his voice. And I think that's one of the things I also would like to, I realize now, looking back, give credit to myself. I wrestled Bob in Toronto. It was AWA versus WWF.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrestled Ric Flair, AWA versus NWA.
Was that in Winnipeg?
It was in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And, so very few people cross that border, So.
Well, Nick, I just want to say I think you were tremendous in the ring, and it was an honor to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the lucid call there, Randy. First one today.
Second one, Alex Marvez. No, and Wes Jones.
That's right.
Third.
Oh, that's right, Wes. Sorry, Wes.
Yeah, we don't want to. No. Anyway, we got a couple of emails about your thoughts about Jumbo Tsuruta, who you wrestled many times.
Yes. And you want to know about Jumbo?
Yeah, about Jumbo. I mean, I know you wrestled him in Japan many, many times. A lot of times in the United States as well. You had the AWA title going back and forth.
Sure.
With him as well.
Jumbo was terrific. I mean, most of these guys, and in fact, as a lot of names have been brought up, and I've given a lot of compliments out today, it's only because they're deserved. You don't reach that point in your profession if you're mentally an asshole. You may be physically really big and strong, and you may physically have talent, but at the same time, you've got to be a real human being. I'm not quite sure if Stan Hansen's a real human being yet. I got to check on that.
I got a question. Between Bruiser and Crusher and the Road Warriors, they came from different eras. How would you compare them for their eras? And just you wrestled both of them many times.
Right. The Bruiser was probably one of the most proficient working talents in the ring. Crusher, who was in his parts of the country where he was over, was as big an attraction as anybody would want to be. But he was not quite as talented as the Bruiser was.
And how about the Road Warriors?
Road Warriors, the sad thing there is they were the emergence of the first, what you call the real steroided muscle heads. And they were so impressed with just their bodies. The sad thing about most bodybuilders, you can't stand in front of a mirror for 5 hours a day and continue to look at yourself and not have it cause a little dementia.
I got to interrupt you. I just remember something. You told me a joke about 5 years ago about how to trap a bodybuilder. I just remembered it. Remember that?
Well, okay, what was it? I forgot.
You don't remember?
It was something about a mirror.
Yeah, it was like if I have, what do you have when you have like 4 mirrors and a bodybuilder, and it's like a prisoner?
Yeah, that's it. 4 mirrors and a bodybuilder, you got a prisoner.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just remembered that joke.
Yeah, but that was the truth, and they got to where all they were impressed with were their own muscles, and they became decent attractions. There's no question about that, but they never grew, so to speak. They were very limited in what they could do in the ring, and how well and how much they could move, and of course, one of the most honest of all the bodybuilders was Superstar Billy Graham. Mm-hmm. And for some insight, here's a real eye opener for you. I said to Billy, and this would have been 1972, and at this time Billy was about 310, just bursting out all over. He was massive, and I says, Billy, because most of the bodybuilders, they never took steroids. They never juiced up. I mean, this was all just natural work that they did. That's why their muscles were
protein.
Pardon?
Protein.
And milk and exercise.
Egg whites.
Yes. But Superstar was one of those who spoke very realistically. And I said to him, Billy, I said, if you got off the juice and you didn't pick up a weight, I said, for 6 to 8 weeks, okay? I says, what I'm looking at would be gone. Now, he's standing there in front of me at about 6'3", at about 310 pounds, massive, and he says, 25 or 30%.
Yeah.
Did you catch what I said? I said percent. He wasn't going to lose 25 or 30 pounds, 25 or 30%. Now, at 310s, 30%, that's 90 pounds. That means he's going to go down to 220. And I said to him, I says, Billy, I says, you mean you'd go down to about 220, 230? He says, yeah. He says, I got out of college, and he says, I went to play pro ball up in Canada. That's what I weighed.
You know what's funny about some of the guys that ended up being big into steroids? If some of them, if you look at what they were in college,
yeah,
you would just be astounded. I mean, you'd be astounded. I mean, look at like Davey Boy Smith when he first broke in.
Sure.
Or Scott Steiner when he wrestled in college. Kevin Randleman in college. You're talking about guys. Scott Steiner was 177 in college. Kevin Randleman was 165.
Sure.
And so.
And and it just seems so ludicrous that one would work so hard and take the time to ingest these steroids, and I guess it does give them something, and I guess they feel a reward. But damn it to hell, what are they going to do when they're 60 years old?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, he's
Look
had
at Billy Graham right now.
Yeah.
He's had a lot of helpers. What's interesting about the Sports Illustrated article, and they didn't really make a connection to steroids, but the vascular necrosis of the hip, that's like for football linemen that are, of the current generation, it's so prominent. And, football linemen, that's another group that was heavy into the steroids.
Sure.
And they were talking about like the propensity of hip replacements among NFL linemen is just getting out of control now. Retired. You don't hear about them because they're all retired players now.
Sure. Nobody cares about, the OU's meat.
Yeah. Nick, I want to thank you very much for doing the show. We're totally out of time. And I want to thank everyone for joining in. And Al, talk to Nick because we want to get Nick back on when we do the show with Ray Stevens. For Ray Stevens.
Oh yeah. God bless.
Yeah, because we want to do a show, and just talk about Ray Stevens for a couple hours with everybody.
Oh yeah, I got plenty of little stories to tell about Ray.
Good.
Yeah. So.
And I want to thank you. I want to thank Al for all his help, and of course Brian. And we'll be back here with Tony Jones tomorrow at 5.